You know, the diminished scale is such a great scale. I mean, there's so many things that you can do with it. It's a very versatile scale with a lot of applications. You probably heard of half whole, whole half diminished scale. I want to, in this lesson series, I really kind of want to demystify all this stuff about the diminished scale and make it understandable for you so that you know how to practice the scale, first of all, and then also how the diminished scale has so many applications. There are multiple applications for the diminished scale. You know, the diminished scale is built on a symmetrical system of intervals. You can either think of it as half whole, half whole, half whole, or whole half, whole half. And I'm going to really help you understand how to assimilate all of that and make use with all of that. So I think really what we want to start with in our first part in this series, and it'll be in multiple parts in this series so that you really understand how to put things together rather than trying to cram all of the information in at once. I think it's good to work over a period of time at understanding how this diminished scale works and really developing the ability to use it. And you know, this is a scale that can be used in addition to your basic vocabulary, in addition to your. But like I said, we want to start out by just learning the diminished scale and how to practice it. Now, we're going to start with a C sharp diminished arpeggio. You go, why the heck are we starting with C sharp? You'll understand pretty quickly, hopefully. Now, a diminished arpeggio, there's symmetry in the arpeggio. A diminished arpeggio is all minor thirds. So if I take a C sharp, and I want to go to the middle of the horn to start with. A minor third above C sharp is E natural. A minor third above E natural is G. A minor third above G is B flat. And a minor third above B flat is C sharp. Now, when we do that, we have C sharp as the root, E is the minor third, G is the diminished fifth, B flat is the diminished seventh, and C sharp is the octave. A diminished arpeggio has a minor third because there's no such thing as a diminished third. We either have minor or major intervals, or we have perfect intervals that can be diminished or augmented. So in the case of fifths, you've probably heard the term perfect fifth. Well, we're going to diminish that fifth and make it a lowered or a flatted fifth. We'll just call it diminished fifth. Now, the dominant seventh chord has a dominant seven, so a diminished seven is actually a half step lower than the dominant seven. So if we were in C sharp, the major seven would be C natural. So C sharp, major seven, C natural, dominant seven, B natural, or minor seven, however you want to think of it, and then the diminished seven. So our C sharp diminished arpeggio, C sharp, E, G, B flat, and C sharp. Now, to create our diminished scale, we want to back down a half step below each one of those tones. So we'll play a C natural before the C sharp, and we'll call this our C half whole diminished scale, the scale we're about to create. So we can start a half step below our root, C to C sharp, a half step below our minor third, we'll play E flat to E, a half step below our diminished fifth, so we'll play F sharp to G, half step below our diminished 7. We'll play A to B flat. So we just played C, C sharp, E flat, E, F sharp, G, A, B flat, and how about high C to C sharp? So we'll just kind of fill out our scale. Now, if I went down and played the same notes, I would have. But we really want to organize it in kind of a scale kind of manner. So rather than the lower neighbor before each diminished tone on the descent, just learn your scale going up. Then play it down. So rather than I played, rather than I played. Same thing as we continue. So our C half whole diminished scale. Now, what I'd like to do is learn that scale from the bottom, the lowest possible. So, before we get into the application of the diminished scale, using it on chords in tunes and such for improvisation purposes, I think it's really important that we work to develop a good sense of proficiency with the scale, the ability to play it up and down, through and through, and have some patterns that work on the diminished scale, and also a good sense of which scales share the same tones, and I like to go about this from a half-whole diminished scale standpoint. So I would like to think about which dominant chords share the same diminished scale, and to be a little more specific, which dominant 7 flat 9 chords share the same scale. Now, we'll also be able to use the diminished scale on diminished chords, but I really like going about this from a half-whole diminished scale standpoint and just learning a shared application that runs across all of the different kinds of chords. So we'll talk again more about application as we go along. Right now, I just want to, in this lesson, I want to show you some patterns that will help you get this diminished scale in hand and also develop a good sense of which chords, or which dominant chords anyway, dominant 7 flat 9 chords, share the same diminished scale. So those are the increments that our patterns are generally going to move in, minor thirds, very important there. Now, so we'll go ahead and fill in the gaps between each of those notes, the 1 and the 5, with notes from the diminished scale. So C to G up the C half-whole diminished scale. And then right back down the diminished scale to our next root, which is E flat. ready to start expanding the use of your diminished scales and the patterns to include additional situations. And, in the previous part of this lesson, we worked at the scale count of lines and looking for resolutions. Well, in this part of the lesson, we'll include some of the patterns, the other patterns that we learned in part 2 of our series. We did, and we did, etc. I'm not going to play the entire pattern, but we'll work. Now, Joe Beam uses the diminished chord in his tune How Insensitive somewhat differently than he does the diminished chord in Wave. And he uses the diminished chord a couple of times in How Insensitive, but we're just going to look at the first presentation of this diminished chord that he uses, because it's really kind of a similar way that he uses it the second time, and it's a different diminished chord. But in the first 8 bars of his progression, actually in bars 3 and 4 in the tenor sax chart, we find a D sharp diminished. Now, we want to remember to think of the D sharp as being a tone from group 2 of the minor thirds of one of our fundamental scales, B flat, B, or C. So if we think of D sharp, F sharp, A, C, that gives us a series of minor thirds that are found in group 2 of our B half-whole diminished. I really don't know right now. Our next one is based on the diminished pattern that you've learned. And so it starts out with and then very much a B7 flat 9 kind of idea, coming down from the 6 or the 13 on the B7. And it resolves right into the D natural or the root on the D minor 6 chord. So our